Hello and welcome to Poems On. I'm Al Basil, and this is the fourth show of the second season on this round robin conversation on a theme. Our theme today is characters. It's the second show that we've done on characters. And my guests today are, for the first time, Marilyn L. Taylor, and returning after the show from last year, Timothy Steele. Welcome to you two. Great to see you.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
Well, without further comment, I'm going to ask Marilyn to get us into the flow of things. Would you read first, please?
Oh, yes, I will. This poem is a poem that probably focuses on character. Thank you for that wonderful topic. I find that most poems that have to do with character or characters have a little bit to do with making fun of people. And this particular poem about character is quite not that. It's a poem of admiration to a character that I once knew slightly. And the title is To My Neighbor John, who is completely happy. And this is literally and 100% true. I'll just introduce it for a second by adding that my husband and I had just moved into a new neighborhood in the summertime when I got the idea for this, and our windows were wide open so I could hear what was happening outside. Okay. To my neighbor John, who is completely happy. That moonlit warble in the summer dark is you, John, singing your way home from the rehab center where you work evenings. One out of kilter chromosome has never slowed you down. Your nightly whoop floods the neighborhood with so much bliss that my Dalmatian springs from sleep and opens up her throat to harmonize with you, along with every other canine in a 1 mile radius. Soon the air is vibrating for blocks with strains of an unearthly sweetness, prayers rising from the bottom of the brain, an ode to joy with tabernacle choir.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Thank you, Tim.
Yeah.
I cannot help thinking, and perhaps this company will readily know the reference of that moment in the middle of Bringing Up Baby, when when one of the characters starts makes a mating call of the leopard, and the dog and the leopards in the neighborhood all join in, and so it's this human and animal choir all singing together. It's a wonderful moment that director Howard Hawks, who loved to get animals into his films doing things like that, was able to get into it. Bringing a Baby.
I will get my hands on that.
It's great.
Sounds like fun.
Wow. How often did this happen?
Almost nightly. When the weather was decent, he would have his what did they call them, Walkman up to his ear, and he was singing away, with whatever happened to be on the channel or something like that. And it sounds very strange without accompaniment. But then we were told by another neighbor what was going on, and from then on it was sweetness. It really was. It was a chorale.
Well, I think it's great that you were able to enjoy what other people in other situations other-mindedly would be annoyed by.
Exactly. The whole
so good for you.
Well, good. The whole neighborhood was used to this. They knew about John and his walks home, and he was a happy camper. He really was a very cheerful, delightful person that we didn't see too much of, but what we knew we loved.
Well, you brought him to the rest of us, and I like that. I'm glad it happened. Let me move on to Mr. Steele. What you got for us, Tim?
Well, actually, what I've got for you is something I hadn't planned to read first, but I wanted to read admiring both the poem and the feeling behind it of Marilyn's poem. It has a musical connection too. It's a poem about admiration. It's also a poem about someone I did not know well. I knew even less well than Marilyn knew her protagonist, but it does involve music. It involves a concert I attended my senior year of high school during the autumn. And I will say no more about it, but describe it. It also has some of Marilyn's motifs of ambivalence. Some people did not like the concert, but it, I think, was very admirable, and the performer certainly admirable too. The poem is just called The Concert. He soloed for the first half of the show, a troubadour attempting to expand. Then, following a short break, brought on stage a band that would in time become the band. His folk fans left in protest and in droves. Theirs was the music he had helped revive and was, from their perspective, trashing now in late October 1965. We young who stayed and listened were too quick to pride ourselves on our enlightenment. Substantial as he was, in years to come, we couldn't always follow where he went. There were dismaying moments, from self-portrait to the bizarre Victoria's Secrets ad. During performances, he sometimes sounded willfully off-putting or downright bad. You saw him on his first electric tour, a friend said lately. That must have been intense. It was. Yet spotlit, he looked thin and frail. The night before he played in Providence, Detroit would be his next stop, and the mixed receptions he was getting wore on him. After he closed with Like a Rolling Stone, he vanished. The lights came on in the gym. As we walked home in groups of twos and threes, a creamy haloed moon portended snow. The wind swirled dry leaves at our feet as if training to rope calves in a rodeo. Somebody, having checked her watch, announced tonight had just turned into yesterday. We hunched a little deeper in our coats and went with sure purpose on our way.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I have two.
Very much.
I got two questions for you, Tim. One, because a lot was made about that tour and history, and that history was somehow being made because so much was made of Dylan's impact. What at the time did you feel like something important historically was happening? And the second question is, was what you thought the future was going to be like in any way consistent with what now, looking back 50 odd years, the future has proved to be?
I can answer the first part of the question quickly. I did not have a sense of history at all. I liked Bob Dylan very much, and particularly, though I had loved his early songs, Boots of Spanish Leather, things like that, particularly enjoyed bringing it all back home. And this particular concert tour, when he first went electric, was to back Highway 61 Revisited, but it was really very modest. And the most striking thing about it was just seeing the people stream out of the gym when he came back after doing his set, which he's kept his arrangement format, and pardon me for rattling on a little bit here, of doing acoustic himself for the first part and then coming back with a backing band. I don't know if I can get a screen share here, but I did dig out the playbill. And I don't know if you can disable the screen sharing, but I can show you the playbill itself if that's interesting. But if
well, you can try to do it, because I don't know. I'm not sure I know how to enable you to screen share,
okay.
if you are set up to do it or if you're not.
Yeah. That's
Give
okay.
it a try. Right.
Yeah, I did, and it didn't take. But in any case, I certainly didn't. And in terms of what was to come, as you and Marilyn know very well, as we poets know, life throws so many vicissitudes and unexpected things in our path that you really can't predict. And I certainly, as far as Bob Dylan's development was concerned, couldn't have predicted where he would have been in 5 years. And he has always been a kind of enigma. And I think the spirit in which we welcome the unusual is important. And I think one thing I very much like about Marilyn's poem is, welcoming something that, may seem, puzzling or a little disturbing or, inconvenient to others, but really appreciating it on its own. And I think that's what, I think is the ideal response to, people like Dylan, who certainly is not fan friendly, you would say, but just has been so rich in development and provided.
Well, I think it's to your credit that in writing about the experience, you don't clothe it in the historical significance that everybody wants to clothe it in.
Yeah.
I think I spy 2 lines of real profundity here, Tim. And that's the first 2 lines in the second stanza. We young who stayed and listened were too quick to pride ourselves on our enlightenment. How true is that? I mean, I think that does so much about, about generational matters. In fact, I'm always reminded of a quote from E.B. White. No, but if it isn't, I'll correct myself later. Who said, who accused us all of being victims of chronological snobbery. Because right now is enlightenment, but back then, what did they know? They were not enlightened at all. In fact, the opposite. So I think of chronological snobbery a lot, and this sort of underscores what that means to me.
Well, we're at the other end of the shotgun now.
Yeah.
So.
Sorry to be so depressed.
It looks different from over here.
Yeah. It's a
well, I wish
It's just a wonderful revision. I guess it is a revision of that particular evening. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's refreshing because we're not being browbeaten with significance.
Right.
Well, I have to, of necessity, I have to go in a little bit different direction. But this, like both of your poems, is grounded in the actual life of people whom I knew when I was growing up. And it describes a series of events that actually happened, as do the poems that you two have just read. It just so happens that the events are quite different. This is called Not the Thing Itself. He was a widower, my mother said. He lived a long time, didn't touch a thing after his wife died. All her clothes still hanging in their bedroom closet, in the dresser drawers. He left things as they were. He met my mother's high school friend a few years later. They went out, eventually got married. went on their honeymoon with everything still left untouched at home. She'd never seen the bedroom. While they were away, it burned. Not everything. The fire was selective. The wife's half of the closet burned. Her clothes destroyed. His left undamaged. All the dresser drawers were burned that held her things, not his. Her half of the bed was charred, and in their portrait, the first wife neatly effaced. Smiling, his remained. Now, this might sound to you like a ghost story, but the second wife, my mother's friend, thought otherwise. She saw it as a blessing on her marriage. The first wife bowing out dramatically. I knew that couple, old friends of my parents. They used to visit with their daughter, who was older than I was. Our folks would talk and we'd play chess. You wouldn't think to sit with them that something extraordinary ever happened. They were regular, it seemed to me, like anybody else. My mother used to like to tell their story. It's not the thing itself, it's how you take it.
How you take it, precisely. Not how you say it, how you take it.
Yeah, it was very, I never saw this burned bedroom, of course, but my mother telling the story made it so vivid to me that I was able to reconstruct it in a way in the poem. And what always struck me about these people was that this thing that had happened was utterly unlike anything that I knew had ever happened, certainly to anybody else I knew or had even heard of. And yet they would just come and sit down and have some coffee. And they weren't, they weren't struck off their horse and changed the latter course of their lives as a result of this experience, like Saul of Tarsus was. They just went on.
I'm wondering how much of the tale was literally true. One can't help, despite the sincerity with which it was told and again, that am I being naive in wondering, in even mentioning that it seems a bit unlikely?
I don't think that's naivete, but you didn't have my mother. And she was thoroughly convincing, and she was not a woman given to the slightest kind of exaggeration. We all know people who can't tell a story without puffing it up. She was not like that. So that lent an air of authority and conviction to the story.
Yes.
Of course, now when I think about it, of course I think, well, was it really half the photograph right up to the line was burned and all of the but she told the story, and
Yes.
I listened, and it stayed with me. And I thought of that story whenever those people visited, because these were the living
remnants,
people,
so to speak. Yeah.
So anyway, that's that. I think they were characters, and thus my reading this particular poem in a group of poems about character. So we've come round to Marilyn Taylor again.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. I can't get away from the current events issues that are confronting us right now with the Supreme Court, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that almost to get it over with, I'm going to read a poem that I wrote very recently within the past week. And usually it takes me months to call a poem finished, but this one still haunts me. And it's in the voice of a character who may sound, probably on purpose, a bit judgmental. And the title of the poem is Before Roe. Donna, terrible story. Everybody said she must have gone and gotten herself pregnant after one of those high school track meets. She always went to them, you know. And the boy, guess he stuck with her anyway, although the people who showed up for their instant wedding said he didn't look at her, not even once, not even when he mumbled out his vows. They say his dad got him a decent job, something to do with selling appliances, but everybody knew he really was an athlete, you know, a sprinter, could have won a scholarship to Penn. We never saw them out together, but I'm told he bought her things she didn't even ask for, like a brand new Dodge Dart and a fancy washer dryer combination from his store. Hadn't she heard about those places where the Lord helps bring girls like her to term and the boy can still go on to college? But no, miscarriage. That's what everybody said, even though they found her in that very Dodge once they unsealed the door to the garage. I see too much of that stuff on television, and I want to throw things at the screen.
Yeah, powerful. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and the ending is so strong too, and the way that it follows the conversational style of the early part of the poem, which is not difficult to follow at all, and is so declarative that it doesn't force you to draw conclusions about the characters, although it invites you to draw conclusions about the speaker. But when you get to the end, the last couple of lines and that last image, what's so strong about it is that it makes you, but not until the very end, understand. You're not struck by the reality of it all fully until the very end of the last couple of lines. And then you have to think, you have to draw conclusions, you have to go beyond the end of it in a way that you didn't have to earlier on. And I really appreciate that. I don't know if it was a conscious technique, but I think it's a very effective one.
Well, it wasn't conscious in the way you're suggesting, in that I thought that she was giving herself away from the very beginning as being this shallow, prejudiced pro-lifer. But I wasn't aware, and you represent many insightful readers, that it doesn't really get its potency probably until the very end. But I thought that she was sort of unbelievable all the way through, and I keep finding her prototypes on my television screen today. You know, I don't know. Tim, do you think that she was did the ending surprise you in any way? I'm just interested to hear your response.
Yeah. Well, certainly the title points to the ending, not in a bad way, but there is an anticipation of tragedy. And I think we've all been thinking about these matters, and we're all of an age that does remember before Roe, and we all had friends in high school, or certainly I had, who,
Me too.
in the
Sure, me too.
vocabulary at the time, the girlfriend got knocked up, and boom, lives were blasted one way or another.
And the emphasis, the blast, was mostly upon the female and not the male, who should have been able to proceed.
Yeah.
And that's what angers me, and I think a lot of my sistren. Quite a bit.
Yeah. Not to throw, but I think one of the things, the poem moves me in and of itself, but my mother was a nurse in Burlington, and we actually took in unwed mothers who had given birth to children whom they were putting up for adoption, who were housed at the Elizabeth Lund home. Burlington for unwed mothers. And I remember the terrible stigma that attached to the young women. And as you say, it wasn't young men who, though they did, I know, many, not many, but several instances where lives went into channels that they shouldn't have gone into, young men, because of it. Usually in their case, they did marry the girl, and
True, yes.
and it was a kind of the suffering was mutual, but they were not ready
Yeah,
for it.
there were so many marriages, early marriages, where the expression was they had to get married. So I think a number of them did get married, probably not for long.
Yeah. And here I will just interject. In my class and before mine, I can think of three cases like this, and all three ended in divorce not long after. And of course, then you had the children who had to, in some form, shift for themselves. And I don't mean to be tendentious here, but there is something to the aphorism that many of the people who are so to speak, pro-life are not pro-life, they're pro-birth. And
pro-birth,
what
yeah,
happens
also
after the birth, is does not seem to concern them. And the kind of support that young people need, particularly young people need, and the enormous burden of, which can be a great joy if it occurs at the right time of having a child.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Right. Thank you.
Well, it's a topic that will engender and deserves to engender way more than a poem, any poem. But I think what's also worth saying is that for people of our generation who lived during a time before Roe, to listen to this poem is to be taken back to things that we know. But what percentage of the population has never lived in a time when abortion was not legal? And those are the people that need to hear poems like this.
Yes, yes. I think, though, the statistics are in our favor in that, 60% of the people are pro-choice now or more. But I think there's hope. But you're right about it being generational in many ways.
Yeah, and you can be pro-choice and be too young to have remembered the bad old days.
Yeah.
But hearing about the chapter and verse about the details of the bad old days is something that, whether people, whatever side of the line they might come down on ideologically, people need to know about. They need to be aware, because these are the implications of the positions that people are espousing at the moment. This is what happens.
I don't usually write poems that have to do with current events, if you want to call them that, dignify them with that, but I just couldn't help it with this situation. I just ran to my computer and wrote this in a hurry.
Well, I think it says something. It says something about the importance of the theme, that while you are generally unaccustomed to respond emotionally in this way in a poem, it took this to do it.
Yeah.
But it did it.
Yeah, right.
So it's much more than it's not that a poem needs justification.
No, I understand.
But this one has a different, it has a different impulse, that engendered it. So
yeah,
I get it.
Yeah, I know you.
There should be more of these,
I think they're going to be a lot. Take a look at them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there will be. Well, anyway, I mean, that's just, it's powerful as it should be. It does justice. It does justice to the power of the subject, and we've all seen and felt the power of the subject, and maybe that power is being underestimated or overlooked by some people, and it shouldn't be. So, okay. All right. Well, so
thank you, Tim.
Yeah. Well, I don't envy you having to follow that, Tim, but
I didn't mean to make anybody feel uncomfortable.
No,
please do. Oh, it's okay.
no,
Not be
no.
feeling uncomfortable is not such a bad thing,
No, maybe
folks.
that's what poetry is supposed to do.
Yeah.
The poem I'll follow Marilyn's with actually circles back, I think, more toward her first poem, or part of what we discussed there, and that is that, or the suggestion, or that one could draw from it, that characters not only belong to our species, but other species are characters too, or individuals in other species are. And this is a poem about an incident I observed between a neighbor's Labrador retriever and a raven. Because all of our hundreds of thousands of English words are made up of basically several dozen fundamental sounds. There are lots of homonyms in the language, and lots of words that sound the same but mean different things. And I should mention that I speak at the end of one stanza of pose, and this is not an attitude or a role, but is the possessive form of Edgar Allan Poe's.
Pose.
Yeah.
Yes.
The personal pronoun of Poe's.
You can do
Poe's
this.
name.
That's the apostrophe. Yeah.
Yeah. And in any case, it's hard to write a poem that has a raven in it and not invite Poe participate. But anyway, the poem is entitled Brief Encounter. Each time the lab barks up the tree, the raven squawks back at the dog, showing his gift for mimicry and interspecies dialogue. As louder barks and squawks extend their meeting, the lab's fervor grows. She bounds about. She's man's best friend and clearly hopes to bond with Poe's. Yet he looks down his bill at her. Her voice, unvaried, starts to grate. His ideal interlocutor would give him more to imitate, would prompt him to trot out his store of croaks and clucks, would not be vexed by his responding, nevermore, to her, when will I see you next? The bird flaps off, the dog barks on, a little while for barking's sake, but the enthusiasm's gone that fired their short-lived give and take.
Oh, I love that. Splendid.
Thank you.
Prosody is terrific. Interlocutor, yes.
I know they're animals, but I've seen that exchange with people.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
The French have a saying, there is always one who kisses and one who offers the cheek.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
And this is the other side of that coin. Sometimes the cheek is not offered.
I love your word choices here. They're very animal-like in so many, in all the stanzas, the squawks and the croaks and clucks and vexed and other words that don't really have directly to do with imitative animal speech, but just the sounds. Even the last word, give and take. I hear these guys in their brief encounter sounding a lot like we do.
Thank you.
Some of us.
Well,
Vexed is a great word.
well, I wish I have some bird poems that would be very much apropos, but I don't have any of them here today.
Too.
So I do, but I have to change. I have to change direction a little bit, and not only bring things back to humans, but to a very particular human. In my case, my uncle, who was in many ways, talk about being in loco parentis, he was around a lot when my father, who had malaria in the Second World War and was not, he wasn't able to do a lot of things with me. He had to rest a lot. And so my uncle did things with me. And so he had the kind of influence over me that in many other families, a father might have with his son. And this is called In Praise of Redirection. And this is for a guy, Louis Rady, 1927 to 1999, my mother's only brother, and he never let her forget it. His hair was brush cut close against his skull. The bow tie was a touch I'd come to copy. It was the 50s. Certainties persisted. I was a boy, precocious, energetic. Why wait to teach me what I ought to know? My uncle's world was still Newtonian. The numbers came out right in the equations. And big reality still towed the line, no thought of quantum craziness beneath. He taught me slide rule, drafting, soldering skills of a different age, all superseded and most forgotten, but I bear their mark. He started me with abstract, etched into the real, a K&E log duplex, mahogany and ivorite. The basic slipstick functions first. At 8, I had no need for trig or logarithms yet. The markers were precise on gleaming white. Each number had its point along the line, and getting it correct was left to me. Next, sharpen metric pencils. Paper on a board with T-square straight edge and French curve, both thumbscrew and dividing compasses. Lines on a plane conjuring space, their act a skeleton of metaphor, with letters and their cousin numbers traced alike in plastic stencils, coerced into place. No smudge or blotch permitted on the line. Abstraction happened in the mind. I had to be precise to keep it possible. The abstraction, practical at last, and vindication of the exercise. With length of insulated copper wire stripped within an inch and mounted on a board meticulously twisted with a needle nose, hot tip of soldering gun against the joint off center, pistol grip securely in my hand. I bring the point of flux core solder down and melt a bead. Its silver gleams beside the rainbow stripes of a resistor. Circuits, yes, must be complete and functional. But even though no one will ever see my work, it must employ economy of means. No joint must ever loosen, and there may not be an extra blob of solder. To disfigure is to admit a different defeat, no matter that the amp will serve for years. My uncle, certain in his world, could see the narrow path of things done right, and he would walk the line and teach the walking of the line to me, while my perspective leaned toward layered multiplicities of sight and interpenetrating local truths. In curved space, lines which start out parallel eventually may converge and meet. He taught me math and science. I learned art.
Splendid.
Yeah. Yes.
I was lucky.
No,
I was
you
very
weren't.
lucky.
No, you weren't. You were a precisionist. You did it precisely right and reflected exactly what it says in your blank verse.
But he brought me those skills.
Yes, that's
the
clear.
ones Yeah, the ones that I've transferred into a different realm now
Mhm.
began with him back then.
Yes.
And he's the one that
The rules before you can break them.
yeah, he made me love the punctilious nature of effort.
Yes, it works.
And of course, that's where we find ourselves, because who among us doesn't get a headache trying to find the right word, not the almost right word?
I like the line, forgive me if I'm not getting it quite right, but I had to be precise to keep it possible that the precision makes imprecision possible, or a different kind of reality possible.
Yeah, it makes the abstract thinkable.
Yeah.
In other words, when I'm doing mechanical drafting, I have to get it exactly right, so that then the imagination can take what's in front of it and build it out into reality. You can't be sloppy showing it's got to be the ideal in order for it to be, digestible to the craftsman. So yeah, he had a lot of skills, and they were very much skills of the time that's gone now. I mean, who can use a slide rule now?
Yeah.
or needs to, and there is no mechanical drawing anymore. It's all done on screens.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody solders an electrical joint anymore. It's all printed circuits. So it's funny, because they tell you when you're in school, even though you may balk at learning some language that you claim you'll never use, they say, well, we're training your mind. Turns out that's a real thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Well, thank you for.
I just want to add that I love the blob of solder. So ideal for that line. Yes, that applies to so much more.
Yeah, and that's what it looks like. If you do it wrong, you just get this blob. It just needs to be this, and you get.
Yes.
So, thanks to the language for letting this come through. That's my uncle made a very important difference in my life. So I'm grateful to him, and happy to be able to talk about him. So that's it for me, and we come back around to round 3. What have you, Marilyn?
Oh, well, I could read Contingency now, if you like, or would you like me
Sure.
to hold off with that one?
So up to you.
That you mentioned earlier. Well,
sure, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Speaking of necessary precision, I guess this sort of relates to that. It'll become clear who the character is in the poem, but I got an epigraph from on the web as I found myself looking at sites having to do with how to commit suicide. There are many sites like that. It's frightening. But at any rate,
Wow.
This one that I stole from a physician named Charles von Gunten. According to medical professionals, the minimum lethal dose of morphine is 200 milligrams, typically 14 light blue 15 milligram tablets. Unconsciousness usually occurs in 5 to 15 minutes, death in 20 to 50. Let that sink in for a minute.
Wow.
This is called Contingency. As soon as the sun departs the house at 5 in the afternoon, he deposits and seals in an amber jar another pale blue moon. He places the jar on the cabinet shelf and swivels the handle tight, pockets the key in his terry cloth robe, and sits and waits for night. He can hear the grandchildren crowing below, awash in their video games. He tries for a time to assemble their faces and say a few of their names, but he can't recall how many he has or what their small fantasies are. or why their mothers and fathers have come to put his clothes in the car. He careens on the edge of a desperate thought, a glimmer from where he's been. But he doesn't remember the amber jar, nor the moons crumbling within.
Mm.
Yeah.
However, did you get the idea for that?
Well,
Do you recall?
yes, it was a third-hand story about a man who was trying to take his own life, but who failed, and who was thence moved to a hospice situation. And it was I didn't know him personally, or this would be more meaningful, but it grabbed me. It's so tragic. I can't really answer your question satisfactorily, Al. It just happened.
It's such a grim race between memory, intention, and loss of memory. You know, which one is going to win out?
Yes. Yes.
And the story could end. It could end in a number of different ways.
Yes. But could it?
Yeah. Maybe I should say it should reach its end by a number of different paths.
I understand what you're saying. Yeah. It was astounding to me to see all of those how-to websites, though. That was as much of an impulse toward getting the poem on paper as the event itself.
Mm.
Yeah. It certainly gets at what is a central issue, I think, for many of us as the years pass. We actually, I think many of us fear death far less than incapacity.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
And yeah, this phrase called death with dignity slips off the tongue so easily, but it's so basic to what we strive or wish or want.
Mm-hmm.
I'm getting myself all depressed.
Well, please. Well, I'm going to have occasion to speak a little bit about this after Tim's round. So,
okay, I hope I did. This wasn't ill-timed for you, Al. I know you said something about.
Not at all. Not at all. So I guess I have to put you on the spot then, Tim.
Okay. Okay. Well, I will just maybe do something, move to the other spectrum of life's journey to youth. I am, I'm very moved by Marilyn's poem, and anyway, just something perhaps in a different vein, though I hope with the same humanity. This is a poem about a real character, real person, Janet Abel, who was a friend in middle school and in high school. And at the end, I believe, of 7th or 8th grade, a classmate of ours whose family had a cottage on Lake Champlain in Burlington, Vermont, where we grew up and went to school, invited us all to come for hot dogs and a swim at the end of the school year. And we must have been 11 or 12 at the time. And it was just that time when you start to realize, at least this was my experience, that you have a circle of friends, and some are other boys, some are girls, but you're all sort of buddies. But then you start to realize not so much the sameness of it all, but the way we differ, and we're sort of starting to go in different directions, physiologically, psychologically. And this just attempts to capture that moment. As I mentioned, it was a kind of end of school year party. We went to this a friend's family's cottage, changed into our swimsuits, had hot dogs on the beach, and then went swimming. The poem is entitled simply Janet. Wading away from shore, we skirt a cloud of midges. A small-scale desert floor, the bottom is a smooth expanse of wavy ridges, occasionally cross-grooved where a clam has left its path. We scoop from the calm lake, a brisk adaptive bath, my legs like milky stalks in water and awake, spreading where Janet walks. We're 12 and evening leaves me edgy and nonplussed. Her tight red swimsuit, she's slim hips, small breasts, and serves to shape a figure just developing its curves. The lake's inched up our suits, drawing a breath of air. She sinks, frog kicks, and shoots sleekly across the sand beneath the surface where her hair was briefly fanned.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. An awakening.
And so visual, so cinematic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Interesting because, Marilyn's first poem is musical. The character is established by the music of the animals and the man singing.
Yes.
And this makes me see a shot from a movie, with such, I feel the color of it.
Yes, and you have such an eye for that, an ear for that as well.
Yeah. And the details. You could have had a poem without midges.
Yeah.
But, they belong.
Thank you.
It's just splendid. Yeah. Wow.
It's a hard topic. It's not that hard to begin to talk about that moment, that point in your development. But to take it further becomes progressively more difficult. I say this because I've had occasion to try to do this with poems about my version of Janet, because I had a girl about whom I could have written something like that, although I couldn't write the way you do. And it's hard to, it captures something that we all feel, but if you carry on with it, then the experience begins to diverge from what we've all experienced. And so that puts a greater weight on that one moment that we all can feel in common. And that's what I love about this poem, is that it's a moment that I can identify with very closely. But if you wrote about what happened the next day, I probably wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
And certainly not the next year when you came back to the same lake.
No.
Wow.
The rhyme scheme is splendid too. It's so beautifully hidden.
Yeah, it's beautifully worked. And of course, you read so well, Tim, that you draw our attention away. Yeah, which is what you got to do, is to get the listener looking and listening elsewhere while you slip these beautiful rhymes by.
Yeah.
So, yeah, bravo.
Bravo again and again. Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're with people that appreciate this stuff.
Yeah, and do it well yourselves.
That's right.
Well, I'm told there are people that don't care about this, but they're lost.
Yeah, exactly.
Too bad for them.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess we're swinging the pendulum from end of life to the beginning of the adult consciousness, and now back to end of life. And there are, of course, so many different paths that we can walk. And as I like to say, you can't order your own ending like you order a pizza, although I suppose if you were saving up the morphine tablets, you could do that. But if you're not inclined to do that, then you've got to make some choices about how you will live at the extreme end of your life. And this is a poem about a guy that I met he was my roommate in a hospital room I was in 4 years ago. And he told me some things about himself and about his life that I thought were worthy of repeating to others. It's called The Brave. Ruined and genteel at 91, he sketched the quiet of the room we shared with drawn-out husking from his phlegm-drenched lungs throughout the night. Sometime midway, he dared to leave his bed to make it to the bathroom. Unsteady, he went down at the threshold in a heap and shocked his forehead on ceramic tile, his bright blood warm on cold. Back in bed in daylight, he would talk of how a man from hospice said, "Why go back to the hospital? It wouldn't matter." But he went. He wanted me to know. My ex-wife, we've been estranged for years. We live apart. We don't speak anymore. But she relies on me for everything. My every other check goes to her door. It's not enough for two. One day I eat, the next day she does. I made a promise, so that's my responsibility to her. I won't decide that it's my time to go.
Quite a psychological study.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He it's the other end of the tether from the fellow in your poem, Marilyn.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's right.
That's why I wanted to read them close together, because
Yes, I see. And right, they did mesh very well, or didn't, which is, I guess, the point.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really memorable, that guy.
yeah, well, when I thought of character as a theme, he's a person I thought of immediately, because in such a short amount of time, he made such an indelible impression. And I call the poem The Brave because that's the kind of bravery that he displayed is certainly not very often celebrated. It's, in fact, not even very often noted.
Mentioned, yeah.
So,
Staying for others. Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
And not only that, somebody with whom he doesn't, I don't know, the whole idea of responsibility in the modern world it's so different from how this guy saw his responsibility and his role.
Exactly. Yes, it's so sort of skewed and yet not.
Yeah,
right.
it's. But when he said, "One day I eat and the next day she does," and that's exactly the way he said it.
Yes, that's a memorable line.
That's why I had to write. I mean, the poem came out of that line because it just skewered me.
Yeah.
So I think of him because, of course, that's 4 years ago, and the shape he was in, he's certainly no longer with us, but his sentiment remains. So, well, thank you very much. Round 4.
Well, is that me?
That is you.
I'm going to break the mood a little bit.
Feel free.
Okay. I'm going to read a parody of one of my heroines, Gwendolyn Brooks, who wrote, of course, We Real Cool.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, I've read this one at readings and people seem to like it. It's, of course, absolutely real cool. And it's the subtitle, as similar to Brooks's, is The Breakfast Eaters, 7 at the Golden Waffle. We real old, we catch cold, we take pills, we change wills, we can't hear, we crave beer, we eat soon, we die soon.
Oh, boy. You can't improve on that. As
No. People have tried and I've thrown them out.
That's just terrific. And
Thank you.
what I like about it is that the original, which is justly celebrated for capturing a certain attitude of a group of young people,
Yeah, it is, yeah.
in a certain circumstance, not of their choosing, and their defiance in the face of it.
That's the word. Yes.
It's perfectly mirrored at this other end of the life seesaw, because once again, you've got people in a circumstance that they did not choose, and they're also defiant in their, in their own way. It had to be written.
Yeah, thank you. And
I'm glad you did it.
Thank you, dear. I have to take my hat off to Gwendolyn Brooks, who had the brilliant idea of writing it in the first person plural, which gives it even more, heft.
Yes.
Something. Yeah, that does it. It wouldn't be nearly as good as, singular.
Well, you called it a parody.
Yeah.
You call it a parody, but it's to me, it's not a parody. It's a partner.
Maybe, yeah. Yeah.
It's an odd couple.
Can I read one more? Is this our last
I was just going to say that one is so brief and delicious.
Yeah.
This is the perfect time to read another one as this turn.
Okay.
Sure, please go ahead.
Thank you. And this will be sort of a weird grand finale. It's the character, quote, quote, in the poem is one of my many alter egos. It's in the first person, but it ain't me, babe, most of the time. Drinking with Dylan Thomas. Tonight, I've got a date with Dylan Thomas. A spectacular idea, libidinous and with fantasy and promise. I'll slide into a pair of silk pajamas, pour myself a glass of red sangria, and raise a toast to honor Dylan Thomas. I'll sing his soulful songs and melodramas, that lilting onomatopoeia, part Welsh, part fantasy, part promise, and chant with him his childhood panoramas, tinged with the implicit paranoia known as quintessential Dylan Thomas. I'll hear the stresses, stanza breaks and commas, the architecture of his prosody fantasy, foreshadowing a promise in cadences he can't keep hidden from us. So go ahead, call it a panacea, libidinous with fantasy and promise, but I'm keeping that date with Dylan Thomas.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I had a blast with that.
Those you got to work that form. Let me ask you a technical question.
Yeah, there are so many rotten Dylan out there. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, it's a pretty capricious form, I think. But what's your take on how closely or how less closely the two lines which repeat must be as they go through, because you alter them in subtle ways And I've also read plenty of villanelles. Do not go gentle into that good night with your drinking buddy, for example, which doesn't change the two repeating lines at all. So where do you come down on that spectrum?
Well, I'm sort of leaning toward the exact rhymes for this, but I do allow a little bit like a plural or something like that, because I don't think you'll find too many lines in this poem that do move over into the slant rhyme. And it sort of depends on your regional accent, whether melodramas, rhymes with promise, or I wonder how the Brits pronounce Thomas, because then that would wreck the whole thing.
Well, how do the Welsh pronounce it? But
Yeah,
so you're focusing on the rhymes, not on the whole line.
Yeah. I think that the whole line comes out of the rhyme, which had better lend itself to an extension, because otherwise it just falls flat on its face. But I had a hard time coming up with sangria and prosa which is very Marilyn Hackerish. Very Marilyn Hackerish. I usually disapprove of that, but there's sometimes when you just get to do it.
It is very nicely Tomanesque in all its delight in sounds, because of course he was. And as far as rhyme goes, he was famous not only for using elaborate schemes of rhyme, but also using funny assonantal rhymes too, that we don't generally find in English verse. When it's off rhyme, it's usually consonantal, as in Emily Dickinson or Wilfred Owen. But you do a lot with the vowels there, and I think he would heartily approve.
Well, good. I hope he's up there approving and having another drink on that.
Yeah.
Or something. But it for me it worked. I'm fond of this poem. I don't mind admitting it.
Well, you should be.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Ditto. Yeah, because it's hard to that's a hard form.
Yes, it is. And I've seen it. Absolutely. I edited an anthology of villanelles, and I'm telling you, some of them were just so off track. It just made it almost hurt to read them, because I know that the poets were very earnest about getting it right. But I honestly think that there's something genetic about having a good ear for rhyme and meter and stress count. I really think that you can't learn it from scratch unless you have it at least a little bit.
Well, the idea of getting it right from a technical standpoint is one of the contending poles. But what I often miss is when I read villanelles that don't do much for me, is that they've gotten it right, but they haven't managed to actually say anything. It's hard to do both.
Right, and line breaks are so important. The line breaks are crucial, because if it all goes thud at the end of each line, it gets really boring and painful.
Wow. Well, good. I'm glad we got in a little shop talk for the.
Yeah, that's right. I can't help it.
For the meter hounds in the audience. Very good.
Yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Penultimate round for you, Tim. What have you?
Well, I will follow up Marilyn's nice tributes to Gwendolyn Brooks and Dylan Thomas with a poem that is in part a tribute to Charles Dickens and his great novel, David Copperfield. It is about two characters, and they're derived from David and from Doris Spenlow, the child bride, whom he becomes infatuated, marries, and then falls out of love with. In the novel, you'll remember, she dies, and her death is ascribed to her delicate constitution, but it's almost seems a result of David's withdrawing his affection from her. She's a charming woman and has, I think, great emotional intelligence, but she's disorganized and kind of ditzy, and he becomes disaffected with her. I guess that other experiences, other people could kind of creep into this poem and this portrait, which imagines David in later life, a different kind of David Copperfield than the one in Dickens, but one who perhaps is more self-reflective and prone to meditate on the fact that he now appreciates something when he no longer has it and has in fact destroyed it. Life portrait, thinking of Dora Spenlow and David Copperfield. Her pensive figure charms, as does the lisp and coaxing baby talk she sometimes plies. Yet his devotion wanes. What beckons him? The customary will-o'-the-wisp, a dreamed-up soulmate, beautiful and wise. No matter what it comes to in the end, is that when, in mock plaintive moments, she says, "Don't forget, bad boy, your little friend," he fails to catch the import of the plea. She dies. In time, he marries his ideal and forges to success. Yet the detail of his fulfillment never quite convinces. And it's her presence he will feel hiking up switchbacks of a mountain trail. The daffodil bowed at the canyon's rim will drop a bead of water like a note from its toy trumpet blossom. His eyes will swim and he'll feel a thick, hot tightness in his throat. He's one now with the greedy overreachers. She sat, hands on his shoulder, chin on them, then ran a thoughtful finger down his profile, as if to remind him of his features. Height shows the small lake as a sparkling gem, and shows his threads, the streams that spill and bend and join and part along the valley's floor. He once forgot, bad boy, his little friend, although he won't forget her anymore.
Wow.
Wow. Wonderful.
I'm struck by the mystery of what we can't forget and how, to anyone else, how unsuitable those things can be.
Yeah.
That, you know, that well, all of these, you had all of these experiences, and yet the thing that stays with you is something that seems too frail for the weight of all the other experiences that you're not thinking of. And I think of this exchange within his mind, that thinking about her as a kind of a strange parallel to Wordsworth's relationship to nature and his perception of nature as a young man, that he could see. I think he got me with the toy trumpet of the daffodil.
Me too. Yeah.
That was such a great, and you know, the drop, that was just so strong. And that's what made me think of Wordsworth. And I thought, well, wow, he's crystallized this some kind of power of our ability to view things in our youth that we can remember, but that we don't feel the same way exactly later. And so maybe because also I was thinking in that century because we were with Dickens, but that was a connection it made. And the description of the details, you know, the list.
Yes.
I mean, that's exactly the kind of thing that you remember later and don't want to tell people about because it feels a little too silly. Yes. But you make it work without a trace of silliness. It's beautiful the way it's handled.
I think you make the novel itself almost redundant, really, Tim. I think that if a young person...
Well, that's 600 pages I saved.
Yeah, I know. There you go, you wasted your time. If a young person was a smart one, a sensitive one, were to read this, he'd have everything Dickens put between his legs. David, but it's really beautifully done, and your choice of those delicate images, the bead of water like a note.
Oh yeah.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The thoughtful
and consistent with the milieu too, because you know you can have great details that may or may not so strongly evoke the milieu as well as what you're trying to say about the character. So this is all of a piece. I mean, it's either intentional or subconsciously intentional that you've drawn together this particular group of details.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good one. Wow. Well, I'm glad I don't have to follow that with anything even remotely similar. I am incapable of anything remotely similar, but I am capable of something quite different. And that's what this is. And this is, I'll tell you, after I read it, I'll tell you the story of its conception and birth, which is a wholly different thing. And this is a character. The poem is called Lord and Taylor Closes at 5. And I must do this in the voice of the character. See, I can't let you do that in the store. If I were you, I'd wait till 5 o'clock. When she gets out there on the sidewalk, then you can do anything you want. But I can't let you do that in the store. I gotta say, man, that was something else. This is a dress store. We don't get this kind of action. I mean, the older women, they were shocked. Now me, I like to pay attention. When you first come in the store, like in a movie, clean, the suit, tie with that, the shades correct, I said, is something gonna happen? You were quiet, but you were serious. A man should know how to look serious. You waited at the perfume counter for that girl, polite, you don't talk, you don't smile. I'm going, uh-oh, close the windows, here it comes. Your turn comes up, you talk, she talks, still small. She leaves the counter, takes you up the stairs, back to the storage closet, close the door. We looked at each other. Now, Cherie, the manager, she is a nervous type. She calls security. We wait a while. Nobody talks. Nobody moves, and we don't hear a thing. But Cherie goes upstairs, and when security arrives, she points. Just then, the two of you come out the door. I see your eye. You got the girl beside you, and your eye, it moves the other way and sees the guards come up. Now, this is quick. You jump down, boom, you pick her up. You got her in your arms like firewood. You move towards everybody, bam. You use her knees like, boom, a battering ram, and they go, bam. Cherie is flying one way, boom. The guards are grabbing at the girl. They want to hit you with their clubs, but bam, the girl is in the way. They start to pull on her legs. You're going down the stairs. The girl has got this funny smile. She's saying nothing. And you're dragging everybody with you, and you, boom, you hit the floor level, and they got her by the arms. They're pulling, and you got the legs. You're dragging, and they got the sticks out. And then she pulls away, and they all get their shots in on you. Bap, bap, bap. And throw you out the door here on the street. I tell you what, you almost made it out. Who is that girl? I bet she knows you're serious now. You okay? Your suit's not ripped. Your tie is straight. The shade's correct. You're in a movie.
Bravo. That was beautifully performed.
Well, thank you very much. It was performed better in real life.
Come on. Oh, wow. That was great. And thank God you didn't use the dialect with punctuation. You know what I mean? Like the darling with the N apostrophe at the end, that sort of thing.
No. Well, this guy had the real guy had quite a genteel accent. This This
Mhm.
took place in downtown DC in 1980.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't a Lord and Taylor store. It was a Franklin Simon store, but they're not open anymore. So I changed the title.
Good.
But anyway, so all of this happened, but I never wrote about it until I went to my first Westchester, which was in 2008, and I took a workshop with David Mason on dramatic monologue, and this was my homework.
Oh, wow. Well, it's a huge success, I think, from concept to paper to out loud.
Well, it was my first Westchester, and I was very old for a rookie, so I wanted to make sure I made an impression.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
So, but all quite true. In all the details of this poem are true, except I don't know that the name of the manager was Cherie, but she did get thrown up against the wall. So,
Wow. I really was surprised. I thought maybe I was supposed to know this was true, but I was surprised by your emphasizing that it was all too true.
well, it's the only thing this dumb that I ever did in my life. So I just wanted to admit to it.
Not dumb.
Well, I did not end up marrying the woman for whom this excruciating scene was played. So it doesn't have a happy ending that way.
Oh, that's
But
okay.
I got something out of it. So, all right, thank you very much. Now, on to the last round. What's your final offering for us, Marilyn?
Cecilia and Bobby, A Tale of Love Gone Wrong.
Oh, yeah.
You ready? It's
I am.
sonnet. It's a serious sonnet. At 20 years of age, Cecilia fled her cozy bedroom in her father's house, became her bashful boyfriend Bobby's spouse, and plopped her body next to his in bed. Ham hocks in one hand, cupcakes in the other. She overdosed her Bobbykins with edible delights until he threw her out. Incredible? He said it felt like binging with his mother. The town's still talking after all these years about the way Cecilia dried her tears and drove her little Subaru to Sears to buy a set of barbecuing spears, and how proficiently she did the job of turning Bobby into shish kebab. A little corny.
As funny as you are, and you are so often funny, it's ironic that that we had to get this far into the program for. Although we real old is funny too, but not like this.
Yeah. Sometimes I was, worried about being labeled as, oh, funny verse, that's light verse, and that's nothing verse, and that drives me crazy. But it doesn't really drive me crazy. I'll occasionally slip into something. And lately, I've been writing more and more serious poems. Could it have to do with the passage of time?
Well, you're also perfectly capable of writing funny poems that on serious themes that are fundamentally serious.
Yeah, there are some.
And there's nothing. I mean, that's a great way to sneak the pill by lips, teeth, and gums.
Yeah. And both of your poems, these last two poems, illustrate the rich vein of material in what seems just on the surface of it to be grotesque, but well worked out or well treated. It's anything but, yeah.
Well, I think the same is true at Lord and Taylor, certainly. Yeah. Well, thank you guys very, very much. You've been such wonderful listeners. You get it.
Well, this is what what gave me the idea for the series, it's now we're well into the second year, was all the great conversations that I've had with you and so many other people, mostly at Westchester in the early years, that I miss. And when COVID hit, the chances for those in-person conversations just evaporated. And so I thought, well, let's make a virtue out of the necessity of technology. So at least we can do this, even if I won't see you at Poetry by the Sea in a couple of weeks. Yeah. So for your last offering of the day, what do you have for us, Tim?
Well, I thought I would close with a poem about my wife, or that describes my wife. It's turns on very simple contrast between art and life and stasis and motion. It described just a moment, probably at least 40 years ago, when we visited the Yale Center for British Art in New Haven, not long after it had opened. And I think that there's plenty of introduction, though I did note this morning, looking at the poems, that this too does have the word pose. And in this case, it is a noun, meaning posture or an attitude a sitter assumes when his or her portrait is being painted by an artist. Woman in a museum. You sit suspending your critique of Venuses and nymphs at play, while a few scattered strollers creak slowly across the floor's parquet. Beside you on the bench, your purse, capacious, well-worn leather, shows a slumped, collapsed look. You know worse for touring, strike a fresher pose. On your crossed legs, your forearms crossed. Your blonde hair in a single fold over your shoulder makes a glossed and negligent descent of gold. And though a grace so natural seems something only art supplies, you now, with a distracted smile, among the static beauties, rise.
A glossed and negligent descent of gold.
Yes.
What a beautiful line.
What a beautiful line. I understood that.
Thank you.
Wow.
Thank you.
You didn't send that one ahead, did you?
I did, but I think it was the last one of the group. So perhaps it
yeah, because I couldn't find my copy either.
Right, but I'll tell you, it's nice to have it to be surprised
exactly.
by it.
I'm tempted to ask you to read it again. But
yeah, actually, would you? No, go ahead. Go ahead. Read it again, please.
So I won't be. Yeah, please.
Oh, well, thank you. Woman in a museum. You sit suspending your critique of Venuses and nymphs at play, while a few scattered strollers creak slowly across the floor's parquet. Beside you on the bench, your purse, capacious, well-worn leather, shows a slumped, collapsed look. You know worse for touring, strike a fresher pose. On your crossed legs, your forearms crossed. Your blonde hair in a single fold over your shoulder makes a glossed and negligent descent of gold. And though a grace so natural seems something only art supplies, you now, with a distracted smile, among the static beauties, rise.
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow.
Beautiful ending, too.
Yes, so lovely and not afraid about being emotional.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that really strikes me about this is that what is described in the language, which is very easily easily translatable from say the posture or the way that the way that the purse looks, into the emotions that you're trying to convey. So you have a very, very clear picture and you have a very clear feel of it. And yet the quality of the language itself is a whole other dimension of richness that's very, very consonant with what you're describing. And I mean, we say that all the time about poetry, but this poem, it really struck me that there's this reinforcement between this very kind of dense, this is a profusion of richness in the language that matches what's being conveyed, the emotional quality of what's being conveyed. And once again, it's like a moment, there's so much captured in the image, in the emotion of the moment of the image. So you really have an ability to do that. It's fabulous strength.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, I would agree with that completely.
Great.
It reminds me of the Musée des Beaux-Arts.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
Yes.
much in its tone.
Yeah. I certainly had that in mind. Lovely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Is that in any of your books?
Yes, it's in the color wheel.
Great.
I think I have that book.
Yeah, I'll look it up. It's a keeper. Wow. Well, I get to have the final word here. And while this poem is rather long, it is also kind of a personal manifesto. So I mean to subject it to you, or you to it. It's called How to Play Scopa, or Why I Tell Stories. We always played scoop on the kitchen table. My nanu sat next to the window on my right. He had 100 hairs or so that stuck up, blunt and white, a quarter-inch above his scalp. He let me test their spring against my little palm. I saw and felt them bend, but otherwise his head was smooth. He had a hole I didn't ask about up near the top, where something sharp had hit. He didn't roll his sleeves up even in the heat. He liked to wear a woolen vest so coarse and brown it looked like pressboard, not like something woven out of something else. He kept his pocket watch and wooden matches in the vest pockets, and the green and red peroty box in his left work shirt pocket, each dark cigar a chopped and twisted branch. I sat facing the wall, the kitchen clock above me. I was looking down. 4 cards lay face up on the metal tabletop, white, black, and red. The numbers, faces, shapes of suits stood out in sharp relief against the table pattern's light and darker browns. Lupini beans sat in a shallow dish between us. In another lay the shells of eaten ones. He showed me how to bite, first picking up a coin-shaped bean between my thumb and finger. Wet and slippery, it jumped at gentle pressure. Holding firm enough to bring it to me, little hole pointing away, the round front half protrudes. The top front teeth, a delicate maneuver incising through the skin, but stopping at the level of the flesh. Then, pressing down with thumb and index fingertip, I popped the golden morsel in my mouth and chewed. The waxy-looking skins dropped in the pile. He had a glass of Zinfandel, a wine he made down in the basement in the cool back room, the walls covered with flags cut out of magazines. America. I helped sometimes by picking stems and seeds out of the mash. I had a glass of ginger ale, a little wine to color it. We ate and drank, and in his broken English, he told me Sicilian stories while we played game after game of scopa. He would deal 3 cards to each of us and 4 face up between us. Learning strategy was easy. Pick up cards, the diamonds when you could, the 7s too, and 6s in the other suits to make primera, once the cards had all been dealt. Queens, jacks, and kings played in the places of 8s, 9s, and 10s. They were pulled out before we started play and waited patiently for solitaire. You picked up cards by sums. Your 7 took a 5 and deuce, and if you couldn't pick, you put 1 down. When you could sweep the table, you got an extra point. You put the card face up to mark it in your pile. You learned to tempt the future with your attitude. Your manner as you picked up cards suggested the rolling of the waves against the shore. They all must come to you deliberately. When I was in the spirit, I would sweep card after card my Nanu would put down. He was delighted I could be so strong. He told me once about a boy and girl, brother and sister, who were orphaned young. Their dying mother made the brother swear that he would bear his younger sister on his shoulders everywhere they went, so she'd be safe. And so he carried her for years as they both grew, her knees around his neck. One day, she spied a fellow in the crowd at market. "Let me down," she said. "I like that boy. From the way he looks at me, he likes me too." "I promised not to let you off my shoulders until you were grown," he said. "You're still too light." But she had begun to plan and signaled to the boy above her brother's head. "Then take me to a field," she said. "I have to answer nature's call." The boy followed behind them at a distance and watched. The brother picked up stones and threw them out into the tall grass of a field, and birds flew up. "You may get down, no one is out there. Hurry up and come right back," the brother said. Next day, by the same field, she asked again. This time, the lover hid out in the tall grass, holding captured birds. And when the brother threw the stones, he let the birds fly up. Soon after came the girl, and they did what they wanted in the grass. As time went by, the brother noticed that his sister grew a little heavier each week. "I'm carrying a child," she said. "How can this be?" he said. "I have a lover. That proves I'm old enough," she said. "You've kept your promise to our mother. Put me down." I shuffled and I dealt. The game went on. At 6, I played my Nanu even. Why did he tell stories? To distract, to teach, to entertain? We never spoke of morals. He didn't teach a lesson, but I learned. You told the stories that you knew, the ones given to you, for joy of company, for joy of telling, as I'm doing now.
That's a manifesto.
Yeah. Yeah. Indeed. Yeah.
I was lucky in my relatives, I have to say.
You inherited their gift for storytelling, that's for sure.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, both my parents were good storytellers too. And so I come by it honestly, at least. Well, anyway, thank you very much. This is, and I'm grateful that I got to read that poem. It's too long for me to read at a regular reading, but it's one that means a lot to me. So I'm glad I was able to work it into this particular program. And lovely to see you. Lovely to hear your work. You know, this is.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Lovely to read with Marilyn and you too.
Yes, so wonderful to see you, Tim, again. I hope it'll be soon, one of these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, until then, this will do nicely as a memory. So thanks very much. I'm going to end the proceedings, and anybody who is interested can find this on YouTube very, very shortly. So thanks very much. So
have a great rest of the weekend.
Yes, and the same to you, Tim and Al, both of you.